Today we continue to work on our snake game. Last time we added food spawning, we detected whenever our snake collides with the food, and we grew the snake once the food is eaten. And today it's finally time to introduce our enemies. We are gonna have snake clones spawning when we eat the food, and these clones, they will replay the path that we took throughout the game. So I guess we can get started. So in order to replay the path, we actually need to keep track of that path. So we need to store it. Let's jump into our game state, and pretty much we can say that we will have an array of positions, which is player path. This is an array that is going to keep track of every single cell that we visit in order. First of all, in the game, we need to make sure that it is initialized as null, just because that's how our STB dynamic array library expects it to be. Then we have init snake, I think. Yep. Where we need to tell that, hey, let's push into the game player path this first start position. So this is our initial cell. And then we have snake do step function where we move our snake, and once new head is assigned, we can once again push this new head into our path. So game player path new head, and this is pretty much everything that you need to keep track of the path that your snake took throughout the game. Now if we run the game, everything continues to work as before, but now we have our path stored in the game state. So let's introduce our snake clone. Let's find some snake struct, and next to it let's define a new one, which is going to be, let's name it SnakeClone. It will be a tiny wrapper around our snake, but the thing that we need to introduce or add to snake's functionality is an index into the game state player path. So it's going to be player path index, and this index is going to be referencing like where to look at this player path that we're storing. So every single new clone that we spawn, it's going to have index set to 0 so that it points to the start of the player path array. And as the clone moves, this index simply gets incremented and the clone replays our path. Now that the struct is defined, let's think how we can spawn our snake clone. First of all, where should that happen? That should happen whenever we eat the food, right? So let's spawn clone. We will probably need the player as well. Let's see if we do. Spawn clone given player snake. So what do we need to spawn a clone? First of all, we need to define a new snake. Then we need to init that snake, right? So it's going to be snake. We need to introduce new tile state for that. So it's going to be clone tile. Row and column. So let's say row, column, and some length. First of all, let's do the clone tile. Clone tile, so new tile state. This will require us to add new color for clone tile. Let's make it reddish. So just switch these two. And next we need to understand where we want to spawn our clone. Alright, so we want to spawn it in our start position. So whenever the game starts, player is spawned at start position, and that start position is actually saved as our first position inside game player path. Right? So player path 0 is exactly what we need. So we can say that hey, size t row is row, and size t column is game player path 0 column. Yeah, we could have just inlined it here, but makes it a bit simpler to explain. And finally, each clone is going to be of the same length as currently the player is. So the bigger the player, the longer its snake. The longer my snake is, the longer the new clone spawns. So length is going to be my snake length. That's why we have player tiles, right? So that represents the length of our snake. And in init snake, what do we do? We're setting all the values, and yeah, we actually need to differentiate when we are initting the player and when we are initting the clone. So let's do that using boolean flag, but it can also be some enum. But for now, I guess to easier do it, we can simply say that hey, if is player, and we can push the start position only in case this is our player. Right? So when we spawn the clone, we don't actually want to add another start position into the player path. But other than that, everything remains the same. So when we init the game, initialize the player, we need to set isPlayer to true. And when we initialize the clone, we need to say that, hey, this is not a player. If we run it, again, everything seems to be working. We eat the food. And yeah, nothing crashes, that's great, but we still don't see our enemies. Why is that? This is exactly as described before. We need to mark the tiles for every single clone that we spawn, the same way that we do for player. So we can say clones mark tiles. Clones mark tiles. We have many clones, so let's do that. We have clones length, which is game clones, right? So we need to actually keep track of all the clones that we spawn. So let's do that. Right, so we have SnakeClone clones, and we never spawn clone. We actually need to add the snake. So this is SnakeClone clone. So we need to tell it that our snake is the thing that we just initialized here, and it needs to start from the 0 index of player path. And then we can simply push game clones, this new clone, so that the game contains an array of all clones that have been spawned so far. And now, when we want to mark the tiles for each clone, we need to iterate and it is as easy as we can say that hey, snake mark tiles where we get game clones at index I. Oh, okay, we need to actually provide a snake. So this should be it. Let's try to eat that food and see what happens. Bam. Here is our snake, an enemy snake that is spawned in the start position, and now another snake is spawned there. The problem right now is that it is not moving. and it is not moving because we do not move it in our while loop. So for player, we usually have this snake 2-step, and for each clone we can say that, hey, let's move clones, something like that. Right. Again, we can grab the size and we can iterate. We can say that, hey, SnakeClone is actually game clones I, right? And now we need to think, how do we move it? Really, what we need to do is we need to say that, hey, like position next is going to be my clone. It's going to be game player path, right? Because we want to replay it at what? At clone player path index, right? But yeah, and then we need to do the same thing as we do for our player path, where we need to iterate over all tiles of the given snake, shift them, and replace the head with this next one. So let's do that. We can do it something like this. For J, we need to start, I think, from the end. Let's see, size T, some sort of length is clone snake tiles. That's the length of my clone snake. From -1, it's greater than 0. We don't want to take the one on the 0. It's going to be then clone snake tiles at J is a copy of its previous tiles J -1. And finally, we can say that, hey, snake tiles 0 is actually this next thingy. Right, and then finally, we need to increment that index. Let's see how that works. And hey, look at that. The clone is replaying our path, and the next clone that is spawned, it already has greater length than before. The next clone is even longer. The next clone, and so on. As you can see, the difficulty rises quite quickly. We need to now avoid hitting those clones, although right now we don't have any collision detection and we can run through those snakes quite easily. So one thing that, no, not even one, a couple of things. First of all, let's see what we can do with a situation when the clone is running over my body. Which means that the collision with the enemy, which we're gonna introduce in the next episode, is going to happen based on player's snake head. So only in case my head hits an enemy, then it's game over pretty much. But if I miss the enemy can still hit me at my body, so any tile other than the head, and we can somehow show it to the client, to you pretty much. And what we can do is introduce yet another tile state, which says that the tile is actually occupied both by clone and player tile. Let's make it something like clone, was it, and player tile, something like pinkish, maybe something like this, not entirely sure, but let's see how that happens. And both both our player snake and the clone snake, they are using snake mark tiles method, and we set the state right here. So we set the state of the snake. So if the player snake occupies the tile and at the same time our snake clone occupies the same tile, pretty much whoever marks this tile as last will override previous state. So if we first process the player, we will put player tile, and then if we process the clone, we will simply override it and say that this is a clone tile. But what we want to do, if we want to check that some condition and say that, hey, actually tile state is going to be clone and player tile. So what this condition should be, it's like if my tile state is player tile and snake value is actually clone tile. So this means that in case the player has marked this tile before we are working with this clone snake, or another case if tile state is actually clone tile and our snake value is player tile. In this case, we understand that this is an overlap of two snakes, and we would like to show some sort of a different color. Let's see whether it works or not. Oh, okay, I did see some sort of pinkish color. Let's spawn a bit more snakes and see how that thing works. All right, we can even, there's no collision yet, so yeah, looks okay to me. Right, so we can actually understand that, yeah, everything is fine. There is no game over yet. I mean, we don't have any collision detection yet with snakes and enemies, but this works nicely. And the last thing we probably want to do is reduce the difficulty a bit, so we can introduce the decay for the clones. So whenever we eat the food, we can reduce the length of all current clones, which means that eventually they can die. So the first clone that spawns, it is of length 3, and it means that once it is spawned and we eat 3 foods afterwards, it should die and no longer be part of our game. So let's try to implement that. We can add the method, let's say reduce clones. See what we can do here. Reduce clones. Again, we need this clone's length. We need to iterate through the clones. And what do we need to do here? We can grab the clone itself. Right, so for each clone, we would like to pop, which simply removes the last element of clone snake tiles. Right, we simply pop it off, and then the snake tiles array can become empty, and that indicates that the clone has died. So we need to check for that. So in case array length of clone snake tiles equals to 0, we need to delete that clone. How do we do that? I think it's del swap. Let's see. It says that delete that AP, replacing it with element from the end of the array, O1 performance, exactly what we need. So we can say that, right, game clones delete at index I. The biggest issue here is that we need to iterate it from the last clone. I think if we iterate it from the first, yeah, our clone's length, yeah, let's do it from the last. This is because, like, first we say that clone's length is, let's say, 10. We take first clone needs to die off, and we reduce the length of array to 9, but the cloned length is still 10, so we do weird stuff that we don't want to do. It means that we need to start with our clone's length -1. It should be greater than or equal to 0. It should go downwards, and now we can yet use size t. We need to use int because of I can be 0, and then minus minus goes to -1, and in case of size t it will simply be some very large positive integer. Let's see whether it works or not. So the first clone is spawned. We can see that its length is 3. We eat the food, and the second spawned clone has length 4 as before, but the first one has length 2, which is great. Eat another food. You can see that it's already of length 1, like following me like a doggy. Bam, and it disappeared. So this gives us a bit more room to breathe throughout the game. A few clones will be removed from the game the more food we eat, but still the amount of enemies with time will grow, or at least the amount of enemy tiles on the screen. So this is pretty much it for the enemies section, and next time we will work on collision detection between our snake and enemy snakes. We will introduce the game over state, some game over screen, and maybe like a restart of the game as well. I hope you liked it. So if you did, do not forget to like the video. If you like this kind of content, please do subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you again. Bye.